All right, so let's do endocrinology. Each one of these characters up here actually has some kind of endocrine issue. And we'll talk about that as we go along with this. Okay? So, homeostasis. All right, this is a continuation of A01. Homeostasis. Our body absolutely hates change. It doesn't like it. Okay? So we could have two systems that really control anything that's going to cause change. Okay? The two systems that we have over here is the nervous system, which you learned about. The nervous system, which you learned about before. So let me just refresh your memory from that, since that was the last thing you really talked about in A&P1. The nervous system acts very rapidly. So what happens here, as soon as you touch something, you're going to move your hand away. If it was very painful, your hand moves away really fast, and that sensation of pain goes away very fast, right? Okay? So that's what's happening here. It acts very rapidly, milliseconds, but it's short-lived. It doesn't last that long on here. We also have the messenger system is going to be this electrical impulse, as you learn, called an action potential. This electricity that goes down the axon until it gets to the final end area, and it's going to release the neurotransmitter at its axon terminal to tell another organ what to do. Okay? It's very specific. I touch something hot over here, my leg doesn't go up, right? It's specific. It's only going to be able to, you're going to move that arm away from you. Okay? And it may stimulate or inhibit the release of hormones. Okay, and we'll talk about hormones because that's what this biggest topic is in terms of endocrinology. Primarily, if you think about the nervous system, it's only going to tell two other organs what to do: muscles and glands. That's it. Those are the only two things, as opposed, well, it does also tell another neuron what to do, but I'm talking about different organs. The only thing it does, it's going to tell a muscle what to do. Now, keep in mind, we don't just have muscles like this. We have muscles that are going to be, also muscles that are going to be smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, right? You're going to all have that, okay? So, extension here. All right. So, think of smooth muscles around the uterus, around the urinary bladder, around blood vessels, around small intestines, large intestines. It has control about these things, okay? And glands, right? You smell some kind of pizza, all of a sudden your salivary glands start kicking in, right? You don't tell them what to do. You have nerves that are going to do what to do. Then the other system that's going to control homeostasis is what we're going to deal with now, is the endocrine system. So let's compare and contrast the endocrine system with the nervous system, since you already know the nervous system. The endocrine system it acts very slowly. You eat a sandwich, and it's going to take some time for that ham to go into your bloodstream, those glucose molecules to get into your bloodstream. The messenger is not so much of an electrical stimulus, but more of a chemical stimulus. And the chemical that we're going to deal with are hormones. And there's quite a bit of hormones you're going to be dealing with. There's about 40 or 50 different hormones. I'm going to have you memorize by the end of the course, probably a good 40 or so. We're going to spend more time on it for probably about 30 in this one section here. If you saw what I gave you earlier on our first day was that chart of all the hormones. And you're going to need to know them by the end of the course. You need to know the name of the hormone, its abbreviation, where does it come from, where does it target, and the function of it. And if you know those things, and I'm going to show you how to deal with this, if you understand the function of them, you're going to understand if you remove it, what kind of disease would you get. If you have too much of it, what kind of disease would you get? All right, so we'll talk about that as we go along with this. Some hormones may stimulate or inhibit other nerve impulses. So that'll happen too. And some hormones, specifically the catecholamines, which are epinephrine and norepinephrine, well, they're neurotransmitters, but they're also hormones. And I'm going to show you how they interrelate with each other. Okay? Now, a lot of teachers across the globe like to ask an essay question on their test compare and contrast the endocrine system with the nervous system. You could write a paragraph about this. That one slide is very important to you. But as I told you, I don't do essays on exams, so I could turn this into a multiple choice kind of question. There's going to be a question or two about this stuff, but you should be able to understand the comparing and contrasting these two systems. Okay? So let's look at the basic concepts of the endocrine system. All right? It keeps our body in homeostasis. We're going to spend time on the endocrine now, endocrine system. So it keeps our body in the state of equilibrium, and it's going to control things like your metabolism, body fluids, acid-base disturbances, temperature. Think of this as the thermostat of your body. If your thermostat in your house is going to be 70 degrees, if it goes to 85 degrees for whatever reason, it's going to kick on the AC. If it goes down to 50, then it's going to turn on the heat. So it's going to try and keep around that 70 degrees. It's a thermostat of your body. Okay? And the breaker box is your brain. That thermostat won't work unless the brain tells it to, right? You have some wires that go from the breaker box to the thermostat. So there's a connection between them. Now, what happens here is the way the endocrine system is that it consists of different organs and glands that are not connected physically. In other words, we have our esophagus connected to the stomach, connected to the small intestines, connected to the large intestines, connected to the poop scoop, and so forth. This is not the way it is generally with the endocrine system. The endocrine system, when it connects the organs, you have the pituitary gland up here, and it tells another organ what to do, like your ovary, and it goes all the way down here. But it's not connected physically. It uses the bloodstream to connect things, and that's why we learned that blood is a part of the connective tissue. Okay? The endocrine glands are ductless. Okay? So what happens here is, and you learned this in A&P1, we can have a duct, or we could have a gland over here, and there's a duct, some tubular structure that will lead to an open cavity. Now, what's going to happen here, this secretion, whatever it is going to come from the gland, go through the duct, and into the open cavity. If it goes through a duct, this is called an exocrine gland. Okay? This could be a salivary gland, goes through a duct, and goes into the oral cavity. But that's not what we're going to deal with. We have a gland here that has no duct on it. Instead, it rides along the side a blood vessel. And its secretion will go right from the gland and go into the bloodstream directly. No duct. In this case, we call this an endocrine gland. And the secretion that comes from the endocrine gland into the bloodstream will always be something called a hormone. Okay? Hormones never go this way. This is anything but a hormone. Water, mucus, enzymes, those kind of things will go through a duct. Water, mucus, enzymes will not go through an endocrine system, endocrine gland over here. Okay? The endocrine glands are basically over here. These are the main ones. We have the hypothalamus, the pineal gland, and pituitary gland. These are found in the brain. The pituitary gland is actually split into two. We'll talk about that later, but it is two. There's an anterior pituitary gland, and there's a posterior pituitary gland. We have 2 hormones that come from the posterior pituitary, and we have 7 major ones that come from the anterior pituitary. So if asked on an exam, where does this hormone come from? If you say the pituitary gland, that's wrong because it's too vague. Are you talking about the anterior pituitary or posterior pituitary? All right? What's nice about this, yes, there's a lot of hormones and a lot of glands, but it's very organized. Okay? We then have the thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, and the thymus gland up there. Even though they might have the word, or the three letters thy, don't get confused with that. All right? They have nothing to do with each other. The thyroid gland is located in your throat area. We'll get into what it looks like a little butterfly. We have the parathyroids, and the prefix para means next to. That's all it means. It means that these are small glands about the size of peas, and they're located next to the thyroid. But they have nothing to do with the thyroid. Okay? Then we have the thymus gland, which is actually much lower than that. It sits anterior to the heart. And it's a big gland that sits over there. Okay? Now, in fetuses and in babies, it's a rather large gland, this thymus gland. But in adults, it's virtually not even seen. It disappears. This is a gland that is actually going to mature a certain type of blood, a white blood cell called a lymphocyte. But in babies, they're maturing. That's why this thymus is so big. In adults, they're already mature, so we're just going to go through mitosis and make one cell into 2 cells, into 4 cells, 8 cells, and so forth. So we don't need to mature them. They're already mature. So because by the time we get to 50 years old, there's nothing left of it. So we just don't use it. Okay? We'll talk more about that later in endocrine, but more in immunology also. Then you got the pancreas. Now we're in the abdominal cavity. The pancreas and the adrenal gland, also known as the suprarenal gland because where it's located, above the kidney. This adrenal gland is broken down into 2 things, the cortex and the medulla. The cortex is the outer area of the adrenal gland. The cortex is the inner part. And yes, the adrenal cortex has 3 hormones that come from it. The adrenal medulla has 2. Very similar to the pituitary gland, you need to be very distinctive in saying is it the adrenal cortex that this hormone comes from or the adrenal medulla. And then, of course, we've got ovaries and testes. There's a few other organs on here, which we'll get into later on throughout the whole course. Believe it or not, the heart is an endocrine gland also because it releases a hormone, something called AMP, atrial natriuretic peptide. Okay? So we'll get into those later, but these are the major ones. And this is where they're usually found. All right, so really briefly, we have pituitary gland, pineal gland, and hypothalamus, which isn't labeled up there, but it's in the brain. In the throat area and the chest area, you're going to have the parathyroids. Now, this picture here is actually a little bit wrong because they're showing that the parathyroids are anterior to the thyroid gland, which is wrong. I guess they're trying to put it in the same picture. They're actually found behind the thyroid, okay? So that's over there, and the thymus is there. You have the 2 adrenal glands, the pancreas, and this figure is a hermaphrodite because it's got the ovaries and the testicles on it, okay? This is a similar picture, but what I like about it is that you can actually appreciate the adrenal gland has 2 parts to it, the adrenal medulla and the adrenal cortex. If you get a close-up of this area of the brain, here's a section over here, so here's his nose, section over here, here's a blow-up of it. So there's the hypothalamus. Pineal gland we found posterior sticking out that way. We also have the pituitary gland. If you remember from AMP1, the pituitary gland is going to sit in a bony structure, a cup, which is part of the sphenoid bone. This cup is called the sella turcica, okay? The only place that this pituitary gland is exposed to the outside world is, well, through here. There's only a small piece of bone that's separating the pituitary gland from the outside world. This is the nasal cavity. So if we have to remove that pituitary gland for whatever reason, a tumor, the best place to go for it is to go through the nasal cavity. Sounds scary to pull part of the brain out through the nose, but the accessibility is best through the nose because it has that very thin area that it just has to go through. All right, understanding anatomy makes sense about physiology. I always tell people that physiology reflects anatomy, that function reflects structure. And you'll hear that. If you haven't heard it through A&P1, you're surely going to hear it in A&P2, that it makes sense the way something works because of the way it was shaped and positioned with all the other things. Okay? So now we have something called the Hypothalamic-Pituitary-Target Axis. Scary thing, but it's pretty easy to manage. And then we're going to go much more into detail with it, I guess, during our lab session later on today. But what we have here is the hypothalamus, and I'm just going to abbreviate to speed up time. You wouldn't abbreviate like that, though. And then we have the pituitary gland. So this would be the anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary. And then you have some target organ. So I'll draw something that looks like what we call the thymus. All right, it looks like a little butterfly. Okay? So what we have here is that we have a bunch of hormones that are going to come out of the hypothalamus. All right, there's about 9 different ones that you need to know. I'm not going to go through them all. But if it has the word releasing in it, prolactin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, thyroid releasing hormone. If it has the word releasing or inhibiting, prolactin inhibiting hormone, it's coming from the hypothalamus. Little tip for you. Okay? It doesn't have to have the word releasing or inhibiting, but if it does, you know where it's coming from. And all these hormones that come from the hypothalamus, all of them will actually target the anterior pituitary. All of them. So you have TRH that is going to target anterior pituitary. That's going to tell the anterior pituitary to release another hormone. For instance, TRH is going to tell the anterior pituitary to release a hormone called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. And if it has the word stimulating, it's coming from the anterior pituitary. Okay? There's some words like prolactin that don't have the word stimulating in it, but if it has the word stimulating, it's coming from the anterior pituitary. That TSH is then going to tell a target organ, in this case, oh, this is wrong, I'm sorry. It's not thymus, I'm sorry, it's thyroid. See, I did exactly what I told you not to do. It's a good point, right? So the thyroid stimulating hormone is going to tell the thyroid, which looks like a butterfly, to release its hormones. And you'll learn them. These will be called T3 and T4, which control metabolism. So we call this the hypothalamic-pituitary-target axis. See it? We could also do it this way. We could have this. Can you all see that? Or is this table in the way? Can you see that? My little Dodge Ram? Right? Okay? That's where the Dodge Ram came from, right? So it's female reproductive tract. So we could have another hormone coming from the hypothalamus, targeting here, and we call this gonadotropin releasing hormone. You'll learn about those later on. That's going, but as releasing, so you know it's coming from the hypothalamus. That tells the anterior pituitary to release another hormone to target the ovary. That hormone could be called follicle stimulating hormone. And And that tells the ovary to release estrogen. So again, hypothalamic-pituitary-target axis. Hypothalamic-pituitary-target axis. Do you see it? Don't make it harder than what it is. All right? So the hypothalamus is going to releasing or inhibiting hormones. They all will target the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is going to release stimulating hormones to tell target organs what to do. Okay? And the target organs are going to release whatever there is as we go through this. You already can see this could be a lot of, that's why I did that chart for you. All right? So you can fill in and get yourself organized. Because there's a lot of hormones for you to go through. Okay? So just understanding it, this looks like a very busy picture, but look, there's the hypothalamus up there. There's the pituitary. So here you have the hypothalamus. It's going to release hormones. Let's say TRH. They're not listed up here, but TRH tells the anterior pituitary to release TSH. To tell the thyroid to release its thyroid hormones. If I gave you this picture at first, you would have all said WTF. Right? It's too much. It's too busy. But break it up. Someone asked me, how do you eat an elephant? I told them, bite by bite. Don't get overwhelmed by it all. Take it bite by bite. You know A&P is a hard course. You're going to have to just get in a routine and do a little bit each day. Well, no, a lot of it each day. Okay? But don't let it just, that's why I have these little lecture quizzes. I think I'm going to gauge you in a way that you'll be able to do this. Okay? So this is just an overview. It's not everything, but gives you some idea about organs, endocrine organs, and hormones that come out of them. You should have something like this, at least in your head, or drawn out on a picture to get yourself organized when we have 35, 40 different hormones. Knowing where they come from, where they go, and what they do is a big part. I'm not a big fan of charts. Why do I give it to you? Because charts, the only thing that I like about them is that if you fill in the blanks, it works. It's active learning. But once you do it and you stare at it, I personally don't get anything out of it. I put it on my fireplace mantle, and it's nice and impressive, but I got to do some active learning. Flashcards work. All right, making the charts. Make a new chart like every 2 days or whatever. That works when it's all blank. I need to do active learning. I can't do this passive learning where I'm just looking at something. That's just me. But you got to figure out what works